Sirens cut through the silence of the countryside as 3 black SUVs pulled up in front of the small residents association office. On the porch of my new farm, I smiled discreetly as I watched federal agents climbing the steps of the white colonial house where Douglas Stevens had run his little kingdom for nearly 2 decades. This wasn't exactly how I planned my new rural life, but when you mess with classified federal equipment, consequences come fast. Everything started 3 months ago. After 20 years of traveling the world on diplomatic missions, I decided it was time to settle down. I found the perfect piece of land just 40 minutes from the city, a small 5-hectare farm with a restored wooden house, an immaculate barn, and enough space to finally breathe without the weight of international politics on my shoulders. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get more stories like this. On moving day, I had barely unloaded the first box when a black Lincoln sedan pulled up at the entrance of the property. A man with impeccably combed grey hair, wearing a navy blue blazer with a golden badge in his pocket, approached with determined steps. "Welcome to Oak Valley. I'm Douglas Stevens, president of the Residents Association," he announced, extending his hand with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We're going to need to check a few things about your property to make sure it meets our guidelines." Before I even unpacked my belongings, I was handed a rulebook with a faux leather cover containing 87 pages of regulations. It covered everything from the permitted grass height, between 4.5 and 5.8 centimeters, to the approved paint colors for exterior structures, a palette of only 12 harmoniously rural shades. "I'm here to find peace, not bureaucracy," I said as I flipped through the manual. "Everyone says that at first," he answered with a restrained laugh. "But these rules are what keep our community valuable. I've been in charge for 18 years, and we've built this place into the most coveted rural condo in the county." In the following weeks, I tried to adapt. I planted a garden according to the specifications, installed the approved exterior lighting, and fixed the fence to the exact standard. Even so, warnings started coming in. First, a notification about my tomatoes growing 15 centimeters above the maximum allowed height. Then a fine because my scarecrow wasn't on the list of approved garden ornaments. With each new warning, the tension mounted. The real problem came when I unloaded my specialized combine. It looked like a regular tractor but actually represented years of technological development, a prototype that analyzes soil composition and detects hazardous substances in real time. As part of my deal with the National Intelligence Agency when I retired, I was allowed to keep testing the equipment in the field, collecting data from different soil types. The next morning, Douglas showed up with 2 council members. "This is completely unacceptable," he declared, pointing at the equipment. Section 42.3 of the manual, agricultural equipment must be stored out of public view and follow the approved traditional rural aesthetic. "This machine looks like it came straight out of a sci-fi movie." "It's just a specialized tractor," I replied calmly. "And it's parked on my private property." "The rules apply to everyone," he insisted, handing me a formal notice. "You have 48 hours to remove this equipment or you'll face daily fines and possible forced removal." I tried to explain the importance of the equipment without revealing its true nature, but Douglas was unyielding. On the 3rd day, I got back from a trip to town only to find my entrance empty. A note explained that the non-compliant vehicle had been towed to the association's impound lot. When I got to the address provided, Douglas was there with a local police officer, a man named Pearson. "What you did is illegal," I argued, showing him my documents proving ownership of the equipment. Douglas smiled in a superior way. Section 58.7, the association reserves the right to remove non-compliant items after proper notice. "It's all perfectly legal." "These rules were never properly voted on," I countered. 18 years of presidency gives me a certain, interpretive flexibility, he replied, exchanging a knowing look with the officer. Officer Pearson has known our procedures for a long time. At that moment, it hit me that I was dealing with something bigger than a simple abuse of power. I went back home, locked the door, and grabbed my encrypted phone. There was a line I never thought I'd have to use in my retirement. "Agent Taylor here. Code Delta 974. We have a situation involving the compromise of classified equipment. Unauthorized seizure by a civilian entity. In less than an hour, the operations director of the agency was on the line. Explain the situation, Taylor. As I explained the situation to the director, I realized that what looked like a simple case of power abuse by a residents' association president was about to turn into a federal incident of unexpected proportions. The Harvester X7 prototype contains classified technology for detecting chemical and biological components in the soil. It was developed to identify traces of clandestine labs, weapons depots, and pathogens, I explained. Camouflaging it as ordinary agricultural equipment is a key part of the operation. Understood. Does the equipment have an active tracker? Yes, sir. It has an integrated remote location and monitoring system. We're sending a team immediately. Maintain absolute discretion until our arrival. After hanging up, I watched from the window at the property that was supposed to be my sanctuary. The irony wasn't lost on me. I came looking for quiet away from international tensions, only to find myself caught up in another kind of conflict. The next morning, exactly at 7:30, 3 black SUVs with tinted windows parked in front of my house. 6 federal agents in plain clothes but with unmistakable federal bearing got out. The lead agent, a woman in her 40s with brown hair tied in a neat bun, introduced herself at my door. Special Agent Rebecca Morales, Division of Counterintelligence and Asset Recovery. We received your report and already have the exact location of the equipment. Douglas Stevens has no idea what he seized, I commented, leading them into my living room where I had gathered all the association documents I could find. Often, arrogance is the biggest vulnerability, Morales replied, quickly flipping through the violation notices and the rule manual. Interesting. These documents already reveal several breaches of federal law about residents' associations. The clauses on seizing private property without due process are especially problematic. One of the analysts with Agent Morales brought over a tablet showing the Harvester X7's monitoring screen. The equipment is intact and hasn't been tampered with. It's in a shed about 3 kilometers from here. Perfect. We're going to proceed with the immediate recovery, Morales instructed before turning to me. Mr. Taylor, during our preliminary research, we discovered some disturbing information about your neighbor. Douglas Stevens runs residents' associations in 3 counties and has a suspicious pattern of acquiring seized properties. I suspected there was something bigger going on. He holds almost absolute control here. This goes far beyond simple local abuse of power, Morales explained as her assistant projected a holographic screen from her tablet. A network of financial connections and properties appeared in the air between us. Stevens is running a sophisticated scheme. He creates rules that are impossible to follow, issues exorbitant fines, and when owners can't pay, forces the sale of properties at below-market prices to companies that seem independent but can actually be traced to offshore accounts linked to him. The digital map showed more than 24 properties acquired in the last 5 years using that method, representing an estimated asset worth millions of dollars. And the local authorities never investigated this? I asked, genuinely surprised. The county sheriff receives substantial campaign contributions from 3 shell companies connected to Stevens. The municipal judge who approves the seizures has a son working for one of the developer companies benefiting from the scheme, the analyst replied, adding another layer of connection on the hologram. That explains why Officer Pearson seemed so comfortable with the irregular procedure, I commented. Morales nodded. Exactly. We have indications that Stevens has several officials on his payroll. But he made a critical mistake by interfering with classified federal equipment. 2 agents came over with meticulously organized folders. We identified 17 cases of seizures against seniors in the past 3 years. 5 of them lost their homes over minor infractions like improper paint tone or the non-approved flower variety. One 78-year-old ex-military nurse lost her property because she installed an unauthorized handrail she needed for mobility. I felt a knot in my stomach. He specifically targets vulnerable people? Systematically, Morales confirmed. Seniors, families of deployed military personnel, documented low-income individuals. The perfect targets for long legal battles they simply can't afford. As the agents finished up the preparations for the operation, Morales explained the strategy: "We're going to recover the classified equipment as an immediate priority. At the same time, we're launching a formal investigation into the association's practices under federal jurisdiction, as we have identified potential violations of extortion, mail fraud, elder abuse, and possibly obstruction of justice." "How long will this take?" I asked. "Recovering the equipment will take minutes. Dismantling the entire scheme and prosecuting everyone involved, months. But the immediate impact will be significant." 30 minutes later, our convoy arrived at the association storage shed. Douglas was there in person, supervising the cataloging of seized items like a monarch counting his treasures. His look of satisfaction turned to confusion as the federal vehicles blocked the entrance. "What does this mean?" he demanded as the agents approached with determined steps. Agent Morales showed her credentials. "Mr. Stevens, I am Special Agent Morales from the National Intelligence Agency. We're here to recover federally classified property illegally seized by your organization." "Federal property? What the heck are you talking about?" Douglas looked genuinely confused, but his arrogance still shone through. "This is a residents' association matter. You have no jurisdiction here. The equipment you identified as the non-compliant tractor is a classified prototype from the federal government," Morales replied coolly. "Your interference with this equipment is a serious violation of national security and could fall under the Espionage Act." Douglas's face visibly paled. For the first time since I met him, I saw his veneer of control start to crack. "This is ridiculous. How was I supposed to know?" "That's exactly why proper legal procedures exist before seizing private property," one of the agents interjected. "Procedures that your association has systematically ignored." While two agents supervised the safe removal of the Harvester X7, Morales continued, "Mr. Stevens, we have reason to believe that your activities as president of multiple residents' associations include potentially criminal practices like extortion, tax fraud, elder abuse, and forming a criminal organization." "Absurd. I have lawyers that." "Your lawyers are going to have a lot of work," Morales interrupted, handing him an official document. "This is a federal warrant authorizing the immediate seizure of all financial and administrative records of the associations under your control. At the same time, teams are executing similar warrants at your other offices and residencies." Douglas's face alternated between angry red and shocked white. "You can't do this. I'm a respected figure in this community." "I believe that perception will change quickly," I commented, stepping forward for the first time. "Especially when your neighbors learn how you've systematically abused your position." "You?" Douglas pointed at me, finally understanding. "Who the heck are you really?" "Just a man looking for peace in retirement," I replied calmly. "But before that, I spent 20 years serving this country in roles you can't even imagine." "Mr. Stevens," Morales interjected, "we need you to come with us for formal questioning." "Am I being arrested?" he asked, his voice losing its usual authority. "Right now, you're being detained for questioning regarding a federal investigation. Your constitutional rights will be fully preserved," Morales explained as the agents escorted him into one of the vehicles. As I watched Douglas being led to the SUV, I noticed movement around the area. Neighbors began to appear, drawn by the unusual activity. Among them, I recognized faces I had only briefly seen since arriving, people who always seemed to avoid long interactions, as if they were scared of being noticed. An elderly lady leaning on a cane approached hesitantly. "What's happening? Are you taking Douglas away?" "Yes," one of the agents replied respectfully. "He's under federal investigation." A murmur of surprise went through the small group gathering. Then something unexpected happened. The lady's expression shifted from worry to a kind of relieved determination. "It was about time," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "That man threatened to take my house because I set up a butterfly garden for my autistic grandson." Other voices joined in, like a dam breaking after years of held-back pressure. "I was fined thousands of dollars when my husband was in the hospital. We were forced to sell our house for half its value after he changed the rules about auxiliary structures. My brother lost his property when he was deployed abroad. The notices never reached the right address, conveniently. Agent Morales listened carefully, occasionally taking notes. "We would like to take your formal statements in the coming days," she announced to the group. Each one of these stories could be vital to our investigation. As the vehicles drove away carrying Douglas and the recovered equipment, I stayed with the neighbors. For the first time, people were talking openly, sharing stories of intimidation and abuse they had suffered in silence for years. "I never thought we'd see this day," commented an elderly man with white hair. He built a system where everyone was too scared to speak up. In the weeks following Douglas Stevens's arrest, a remarkable transformation began in our community. What was once a neighborhood of isolated, fearful people gradually turned into what I believe was the original intention of this place, a true rural community where neighbors knew and helped each other. It all began with an impromptu meeting in the old community barn, a space Douglas had converted into his personal office. With the association's headquarters temporarily closed during the federal investigation, the residents decided to gather on their own, free from the oppressive authority that had kept them apart for so long. The barn was packed. For the first time, I saw all my neighbors together. There were more than 60 people, from seniors who were among the first residents of Oak Valley to young families who had just arrived, attracted by the promise of a peaceful rural life, only to find themselves trapped under Douglas's stifling rules. Eleanor Winters, a 73-year-old retired teacher who almost lost her home over an unauthorized gazebo built to shelter her wheelchair, naturally emerged as the moderator of the meeting. "For nearly 2 decades, we've lived under rules that were never really approved," she began, her fragile but determined voice echoing through the rustic space. "Today is the first day we can truly discuss the future of our community." One of the federal agents who had remained in the area during the investigation was there as an observer and offered some updates. The initial investigation revealed that about 78% of the rules in the association's manual were added without the proper voting process required by the original bylaws, he explained. In addition, we identified diversions of more than $1.2 million from the association funds to personal accounts and companies affiliated with Mr. Stevens. A murmur of indignation passed through the barn. But it wasn't just anger I felt that day, there was an energy of hope. Martha Jennings, a 68-year-old widow living in a small house near the lake, raised her hand hesitantly. "For years, I couldn't paint my house because the color I wanted wasn't in the approved palette. My late husband and I always dreamed of a blue house like the one we had when we first married." "I think it's about time you get your blue house, Martha," Eleanor replied with a gentle smile, triggering a wave of applause. One by one, the residents began to share their stories: gardens they weren't allowed to plant, fences they were forced to remove, necessary renovations blocked by arbitrary aesthetic rules. But instead of turning into a session of complaints, the meeting took a surprisingly constructive turn. James Rodriguez, a retired architect, stood up with some papers in hand. "I reviewed the original founding documents of Oak Valley. Legally, we can vote to completely dissolve the association. The clause is right here, even though Douglas tried to hide it for years." That revelation sparked a flurry of lively discussions. The idea of completely freeing ourselves from the structure that had oppressed us felt both radical and liberating. In the weeks that followed, as the federal investigation deepened, uncovering layers of corruption that even the most experienced investigators found shocking, our community continued to meet regularly. A volunteer committee was formed to study the legal options available. I was invited to join because of my experience in international negotiations, though few knew my true background. I accepted, seeing an opportunity to finally use my skills to benefit the people around me instead of distant geopolitical interests. "What we found is truly disturbing," Rebecca Morales explained during an informational meeting a month after Douglas's initial arrest. The agent had become a regular presence in our community, coordinating statements and gathering evidence. Stevens was running a sophisticated scheme that spanned 3 counties. He used residents' associations as tools for predatory property acquisition. The numbers were shocking: 47 properties had been forcibly sold over the last 10 years through fabricated violations and impossible fines. More than 200 residents, mostly seniors and families with active military members, had been extorted out of millions of dollars collectively. And the worst part, Morales continued, is that we identified collusion with municipal officials, including a judge and 2 real estate agents who helped flip the seized properties quickly for huge profits. As the federal case grew, our community made a historic decision. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, almost 3 months after Douglas's downfall, we held an official vote under the supervision of a public notary. With 97% participation from the residents, the result was overwhelming. 94% voted to completely dissolve the Oak Valley Residents Association. In place of the old authoritarian structure, we set up a simple voluntary rural cooperative, without any coercive powers, without the ability to impose fines, without any authority over aesthetic rules. Its only purpose would be to coordinate voluntary community projects and maintain shared spaces, like the small lakeside park and the main road. The physical changes started almost immediately. Martha painted her house sky blue, a hue that made her weathered eyes light up every time she came back from the market. The Patel family finally got to install the solar energy system that Douglas had blocked for compromising the rural aesthetic. Richard Okonkwo, a retired NASA engineer, built a miniature community astronomical observatory, something no one would have thought possible under the old rules that limited the height of outbuildings. For me, it was a time of reflection and readjustment. After decades of navigating the complex world of international diplomacy and intelligence work, I found myself using those same skills in mediation and building consensus to help rebuild a small, fractured community. 6 months after that fateful morning when federal agents took Douglas away, I got a call from Agent Morales. "The trial is scheduled for next month," she informed me. "We'll need your testimony, of course, but I wanted you to know that Douglas accepted a plea deal. He'll plead guilty to fraud and extortion charges in exchange for a reduction in the charges related to national security." "What does that mean in practice?" I asked as I watched kids playing freely on the community lawn that was once strictly controlled. "At least 20 years," she replied. "And full restitution for the victims. The fortune he accumulated will be used to compensate those who lost their homes and were hit with improper fines." The news brought a sense of closure, although the real healing was already taking place all around us. The community didn't need Douglas punished to move on, they just needed a chance to rebuild without his toxic influence. The following spring, we organized the first annual Oak Valley Fair. Colorful booths dotted the community field, offering everything from homemade preserves and crafts to local art exhibits and live music. The old Douglas office was transformed into a small community library, its walls now decorated with historical photos of the region and works by local artists. During the fair, I noticed Eleanor chatting with a group of new residents, 3 families that had recently bought properties in the area, attracted by affordable housing and the growing reputation of the welcoming community Oak Valley was becoming. "We used to have an 87-page rulebook," Eleanor said with a laugh. "Now we have one simple guideline: be a good neighbor." That night, as the community gathered for a shared dinner under the stars, Frank Miller, an 82-year-old veteran who had battled Douglas for years over an oversized American flag in his yard, stood up to propose a toast. "To Oak Valley," he said, raising his glass. "Not to what it once was, but to what it's becoming. And to all of us for having the courage to reimagine what living together means." The glasses clinked under the starry sky, and I felt a deep satisfaction that no international operation had ever given me. My Harvester X7 continued collecting important data for the agency on my land, but now that mission seemed secondary compared to the meaningful work we had achieved together as a community. A few weeks later, I received an official letter from the agency. It was a formal recognition for the services rendered that led to the exposure of criminal activities affecting community safety and potentially national security. Attached was a detailed report explaining how Douglas's methods of manipulating residents' associations were being studied as a model of social vulnerability that could be exploited by ill-intentioned actors. I put the letter in a drawer and went out to help build the new community garden, a project Eleanor had proposed to provide fresh vegetables for the local food bank. As I worked alongside neighbors who had now become friends, I reflected on the irony. I spent 2 decades protecting American interests in far-off places, only to find that sometimes the greatest threats to freedom can arise in the most unexpected places, like a quiet rural condo run by a tyrant in a blue blazer with a golden badge.